I think the biggest news right now is just around renewables. Like, how many, 6 months ago was when the government in Alberta and Danielle Smith announced the moratorium. It just, I don't know. This one just seems a little bit of a boneheaded move. It seems, I mean, the biggest criticism I'm hearing is like the inconsistency with the way this industry is getting treated compared to other forms of energy in the past. And why would you? Yeah, I don't even think Jason Kennedy would have thought about hampering the renewables industry. Like, he was so proud of how like the renewable industry was growing without any sort of subsidies that maybe the NDP would have thrown at it or whatever. So I don't understand the moratorium. It feels like it's focused on supporting maybe a small group of people. But yeah, what was your feeling when you first heard the moratorium? And then we can talk a little bit about the new rules, I guess. But
Sure, and I'll tell you when and where I heard it. So I heard about the moratorium. I just come out of seeing Oppenheimer at the Chinook Center in Calgary.
okay,
And I was there with, you mentioned
okay,
podcast. So I've got a podcast that I do with two university professors, one of whom is David Keith, who runs the Climate System Engineering Initiative at the University of Chicago. And we'd gone to see Oppenheimer, and he actually knew people when he was a young physicist and worked with them, physicists who actually worked on the Manhattan Project. So it was
wow,
really cool to go see it with him. And but
yeah,
anyway, we walked out. I'd also that group included Marlo Reynolds, a good friend who was former chief of staff to two federal environment ministers from 2015, I think, through to 2021 thereabouts. And we were walking to a restaurant. You've just gone through that punch to the head that is Oppenheimer. I say in a very good way, but you can't see that movie
yeah,
and not walk out feeling shaken and stirred.
100%.
And then I
Yes.
get a call from Scott Perry, who is the VP of Business Development for Northland Power. I'd worked with him at Northland and at Greengate Power as well, prior to Northland buying Greengate's growth portfolio. And he said, "You won't guess what just happened." And I had no guess. I really didn't know. I should have known. I should have had a hint when in April I gave a talk at it was Energy Storage Canada. They co-hosted an event with Bennett Jones, a law firm, where Jason Kenney is on staff, by the way, but he wasn't there that day. And
Mm.
in the
Hmm.
audience, we're talking about renewables. In the audience, a woman said, "Do you think the government should put a moratorium on new renewable development in the province of Alberta?" And I said, "No, that'd be a terrible idea. Like, why would you want to scare capital and shut down things when we can walk and chew gum at the same time?" All the issues, and
Hmm.
to be
Hmm.
clear, there are real issues with renewable electricity development in Alberta, but it doesn't require shutting down all new projects, taking an 8 month or 6 to 7, 8 month pause, and then restarting under new rules. You can do it on the fly. Well, lo and behold, when I'm talking to Scott, I said, "I cannot believe this has happened." And you mentioned comparing and contrasting Jason Kenney with Danielle Smith. So Jason Kenney, if
Yeah.
anything, was kind of neutral. Like, it was hard to coax. There'd be these big announcements of, Amazon buying the Traverse Solar Project, like taking all the offtake of the Traverse Solar Project,
Right. Right.
465 megawatts. It's big Amazon, it's a huge story. And, you'd get a couple lines begrudgingly out of him. And he didn't like subsidies, and he would block federal investments in renewables in Alberta
Yeah.
following that. But he was, Mr. Pro Renewables with pom poms dancing around and doing his cheers, compared to Danielle Smith, who has always had an ideological bias against utility scale renewables. She says renewables
Hmm.
belong on roofs, not on the ground. I.e., hey, homeowners, you want to play around and put your 4 to 6, kilowatt systems on your roof, or 10 kilowatt,
Yep.
whatever it is. I've done that. You go ahead and do that, but we don't like those big Traverse size 465 megawatt utility scale solar projects. And
Yeah.
her decision, was a direct offshoot from that ideological bias against renewables.
Had she communicated that ideological bias before, like very publicly?
So she had communicated. There are all the signals there. Just no one expected her to go that far. Because
Yeah.
why would you take a thriving industry? And Alberta was leading the country in renewables development and investment. Lots of capital coming in, lots of jobs, helping to make up for the erosion of the tax base with oil and
Yeah.
gas projects shrinking, at the local county or the municipal level. Like, so many upsides, and people were excited. Alberta was the place to develop wind and solar combined battery storage projects
Yeah.
in the country. And had this been oil and gas, let's say it was just, shale gas development, we know that no government in Alberta would ever say, we're going to put a moratorium, we're going to stop all development, we're going to put a freeze on that excited capital, and we're going to figure it out for 6 to 8 months, and then we're going to introduce new rules, and we expect that capital to then, take your finger off the pause button, come back in, be equally excited, and it's just going to be good times again. You could never do that. You spook the capital.
Never.
And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
impatient because with the policies in the US under the Inflation Reduction Act, there are great opportunities to develop renewable electricity projects there. And a lot of the companies doing the developing, they've got a portfolio of options around the continent or around the world where they can develop and park their capital and make returns. And it's just the mind-numbing thing is, and this is why it's ideological, is that you would stop that in a way you would never do with the oil and gas industry, and then introduce some pretty punitive new rules, a lot of uncertainty, and think that
Yeah.
the industry would continue to chug along. You must have done it knowing that you're going to put a chill in the industry and it's going to shrink as a result.
Okay, so on that front, what do you know about how industry's responding to this? Has it put a chill on the industry side?
Sure. I encourage your listeners to check out the Business Renewable Center, and that's a project of the Pembina Institute operating at arm's length. So they've done a good job of quantifying the amount of capital, and in now the billions that they think has gone elsewhere because of the moratorium. So there's some good work there. When the new rules came out around, and I was in Ottawa at the time, this was February 28th. I was attending Carbon Removal Day, hosted by Carbon Removal Canada in Ottawa, the first full day workshop with over 100 attendees to talk about carbon removal developments and policies in the country. That could be a whole sidebar conversation. And then
Yeah.
I heard the news about it. And so I reached out, and someone well connected in the industry, that just for the sake of anonymity, I'll keep nameless, but very clued in. And I said, how bad is this? 0 being no impact to 10 being cataclysmic. And, we're looking at the end of renewables as we know it in Alberta. And this person said, right now it's about a 6. So considerable. People say 6, that's not that bad, but
Yeah.
let's say it's 6. It's closer to 10 than it is to 0. And there's a big question mark around how they define something called viewscapes. And by viewscapes, meaning you can't develop a project if it's going to impede a viewscape of people in the area. And how did they define that? Is it a mountainscape? Is it a beautiful view of native prairie grassland? Is it a grain elevator? So there's
Right.
just a lot of ambiguity in that term. And that
Yeah.
term, if it applies to everything, it's up to you. You develop viewscape. And if you'll like that apartment building and you can't see it anymore because of that wind tower. Well, that's a viewscape. And so we're going to sterilize that development. So that 6 could move to a 7 to an 8, closer to 10, depending on the definition.